This is the County Line Podcast, a production of Free Speech America. And now, here are your hosts, Kris Ranney, Garth Hilton, and Kevin Virgil.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the County Line Podcast. We are grateful to have you here with us today, and we are so excited. We're going to have a phenomenal guest. Representative Steve King is going to be with us this morning. I'm so excited about that. But we are here in the Free Speech America virtual studios, and I just want to say thank you to all of you for participating with us, for using your free speech to keep America free. If we're not exercising our God-given right to speak our mind, then there's going to be a void in this country, and that void is going to be filled with something. So I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you speaking out in the communities that you live in. So this is why we gather here every week. So thank you for joining us, where we are all about learning and living liberty from the kitchen table to the county line. And as usual, as you can see, we've got our normal county line gunslingers with us, Kevin and Kris. Good morning, guys. How are you?
Good morning. And I object to being called normal, but that's okay.
Oh, boy.
Kevin can be normal.
All right.
Kevin's not normal either, but that's okay.
Yeah, and we're spread out all over the nation today.
Kevin's
we've
muted.
We've got Kevin in Michigan, and Kris is in Texas, and Steve and I are about to be snowed in Iowa. So,
Garth, quick question. Can you hear Kevin? I can't hear him. Are you muted, Kevin?
I'm not anymore. Sorry, there's a bit of apparently some light construction happening in the hotel I'm calling in from. So somebody decided to start running a power drill at 9 a.m. I will stay on mute whenever they're doing that.
Okay, gotcha.
Yep, gotcha. All right. Well, our purpose here at the County Line Podcast is to connect with and mobilize ordinary Americans just like us. And what we hope will happen is that in our local communities, we can all live and learn liberty from the kitchen table to the county line. So let's get into it. What are we throwing down on the kitchen table this morning?
Good morning. Well, first of all, I want to, as my responsibility for the podcast is to remind everybody to like, share. That's really important. We're trying to get the word out about our podcast. So the more input we get from our audience, the better reach we get on our podcast. So if you like what we're saying, please like it and share with your friends and family, share on social media. We'd really appreciate that.
Yeah, and for my part, I'm really excited to have Steve on today. He's become really very much a mentor of mine over the last couple of years, and it's a great time to have him on, right? I think that I think it was Lena that once said there are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. We're certainly in the latter right now at the national level, but I think it's important to keep our eye on the ball, what's happening at the local level too, right? That's where real sustainable change occurs. So, yeah, I'm excited to have the former congressman on to get his perspective on what's happening locally and in DC right now.
Me too. And I just have to say, I really, really try not to be worshiping my heroes, but I love Steve. I love you. I love what you've done for our state. I love how you are outspoken and you stand for what you believe regardless. I like to identify myself as that type of person. It gets me in trouble sometimes, gets my husband in trouble sometimes. But I've always appreciated that about you. And so whether you're in office or not, I love what you're doing. And so really excited to have you be a part of our show today. So.
Thanks very much, Kris. And I want to start out by saying this. In 24 years of elected office, 6 years in the Iowa Senate and 18 years in the United States Congress, I've taken a lot of beatings, as everybody knows, but all of that is offset completely times 10 by having the privilege to represent the best people in the world for nearly a quarter of a century. And still today, wherever I go, especially around Iowa, anywhere. I was in the Capitol last week for a couple of days, out yesterday doing some things. And people constantly come up and express that how it touched their lives. We maybe did a constituent service for them. Maybe we stood up and defended our values. That happened all the time. Defending the values of, let's say, marriage and life and fiscal responsibility and a strong national defense, and pushing back against the invasion into this country that's coming across primarily our southern border. Some of that stuff that I stepped up on when nobody else was doing 20 and 25 years ago. Today, now it is the front agenda. And so maybe those were the decades when nothing happened. And now we've got the weeks going on when decades are happening. It took a little while, but it was really exhilarating to me to see that when Donald Trump sat down to start signing executive orders on January 20th of 2025, the first 36 hours, I got almost everything on my wish list. And then as I watched it unfold, I got things that I thought, why didn't I put that on my wish list? So it is a terrific and exhilarating time. And it's just say also that we're watching now as, of course, we knew the long knives would come out for Trump and all of his appointees that were moving a conservative constitutionalist, I'll say, God-driven agenda. But and they're trying to slow him down. To some places they are slowing him down, but he's winning some of those too. So it looks to me like we're undergoing a real transformation of America. And I would liken it to when you have a turnaround CEO come into a corporation and they go in and they may go in and dump over every apple cart and rearrange it, put it back together, strip off all of the waste and the fraud, the abuse, the inefficiencies, and put it back together the way it needs to be competitive in a competitive world. Looks to me like Donald Trump has become for the United States of America, the turnaround CEO, and he's pushing back against all of that competition all the way around the globe. So that's how I would put it, the frame what's going on here. And it's a cultural transformation at the same time. It is a direct, intentional, willful defense of Western civilization, which has been under attack for a couple of generations now in an intense way. There's so much going on here. It's a thrilling time to be even be able to watch this. And of course, I stick my fingers in it everywhere I can all the time anyway.
Yeah, it's hard to take your eyes off the TV. Hey, by the way, that reminds me, speaking of executive orders, Kris, have you laid eyes in the Gulf of America on your trip?
No, I've seen the Rio Grande, but we haven't seen the ocean. I don't know that we'll be down to the Gulf of America or not, but I'm close.
Yeah. Go check it out.
So,
Like to see if it looks any more free than it did before.
Maybe a little
January
more blue.
20th.
Yeah,
Maybe a little more blue.
So, well, and it's maybe on our agenda a little later, Steve, but it's kind of funny how you can look back and what do they say? Hindsight's 20/20, but seeing what Trump has gone through in the last, 8 to 10 years, and then looking back at what you experienced some time ago, it's interesting, the similarities. Like, I feel like what you went through is very similar to what Trump's going through now. And back before we even knew what cancellation and being attacked by the media was. And we hope to maybe talk about that, but I know it's not top on our list, but it's just fascinating to see that correlation today. But
well, to comment to that, Kris, sorry, Garth, you were had some say?
No, go ahead, sir.
Well, to comment to that, just looking back on that period of time, I always believed that, first of all, I went to the state Senate and then to Congress, and I believe in the platform. I always believed in the platform. I believe my job was to advance the platform, but it was all consistent with my core values. I didn't have to look at a poll and decide whether I was going to be a fiscal conservative or not, or a social conservative or not. It came naturally because that my convictions matched the platform. And so I went out, and when I saw them working against it or refusing to move it, I stepped forward and challenged leadership every time they needed to be challenged, I thought, or just by my own judgment. And then others would cringe and go, oh, I don't want to stand next to that guy because after all, there's going to be some kind of consequence. And I actually remember when the National Right to Life went squishy and decided they didn't want to push the heartbeat bill, and they were pushing back against me on the heartbeat bill. So I kept pushing on them, giving speeches on the floor of the House. And then they sent out a tweet that said the National Right to Life does not oppose the heartbeat bill, the pro-life bill. And so I took that tweet and captured it off of there, put it on a big old poster, and took that word where they said does not oppose. I struck a red line through that, and I put over the top of it, does not support the heartbeat bill. Same thing. It was, and I put that down on the floor of Congress, and I got about 8 strong pro-life people that come and join me in an hour special order. And I was the only one that would come out and speak against the national right to life for not supporting the heartbeat bill. The rest of them went squishy. And that's the ones that I guess they all spoke because they agreed they would, but it was like, well, I'm not pro-life, etc. But they didn't speak to the real issue, which was national right to life, went squishy on it. And that's an example of what I stepped forward to do. Not really even, wasn't really a calculation, except this needs to be said because people need to know the facts and the truth of this. We've got an agenda to move and they're standing in the way and imposing it.
Amen.
And pushing it. So then, I was of the conviction that, and I said it many times, I would say, you can go out on the branch of truth as far as you want to go, and they've not invented the saw to cut that branch off and make you fall. I kept telling people that all the time. Well, it looks like they did invent that saw to cut that branch off I was standing on, and destroyed my political career and did their best to destroy my reputation. But it was driven by the greed, by the avarice, by the machine, by the Uniparty, and in the end, and I'm sure Kevin knows this, and I didn't realize it. I don't think I realized it when we first started working together, Kevin. But I was sitting in the hearings for the Iowa Utilities Board, it was at the time, for the CO2 pipeline boondoggle, and all this stuff about the history of different moves, comments, people that showed up here and there, was in my head, of course. And then I started to see the Terry Branstad's political operatives show up working for Summit. And Bruce Rastetter, the CEO of the Summit Pipeline boondoggle, his people, how they commingled and what the agenda was. And finally, my light came on, which is, if I were a seated member of Congress when they advanced this boondoggle, I would be, and they need eminent domain to condemn the private property across 2,500 miles of some of the best farmland in the world to build this boondoggle pipeline to soak up hundreds of billions of dollars of our tax dollars. And I'm looking at that in that room with Jess Vilsack, the son of Governor and now just former Secretary of Agriculture Tom Vilsack, there as the lead counsel. 2 of Terry Branstad's sons working for Summit. And Terry Branstad, the long-term governor of Iowa, former ambassador to China, and Chinese money coming into this operation by my observation. And finally, my light came on. What would happen if I were a seated member? I would be in every county seat town. I would be calling out the governors of the Dakotas, Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota, if it made any difference. I've been calling out the legislative leaders, the speakers of the House, the majority leaders, and the leaders in the Senate in each of those states. And I'd be calling out every single member of Congress from those states and every U.S. senator from those states by name to stand up and defend our constitutional rights and honor their oath to the Constitution. I'd be calling out every one of them by name, and I'd be on the floor of Congress doing that maybe every night if I had to kill this boondoggle. And I would have killed the boondoggle, and they knew it. So they had to do the next best thing to killing me, which was destroy my political career. And they did a nationwide full court press that ran for 2 years on me. I was the worst person in the world. I'd open up my Google page in the morning and my face was on it day after day. I mean, I remember the first day my face wasn't on it. It's kind of like I read through my dad's journal, and he served in the South Pacific Second World War. And his journal's here in my desk, and it says, we got bombed last night. That's when he first arrived at Guadalcanal. We got bombed last night. Turn the page. Got bombed last night. About 5 pages of bomb last night. Then there's not a month. There's a month he didn't do any entries at all. Then it is, didn't get bombed last night. And that's what it felt to me like when my face wasn't on Google on the hate page. So I hadn't thought of that metaphorical comparison before just now this morning, but that's what it felt like. And but in the end, though, I would say this to especially young people that are listening in here now, and that is that if you hold your values together, you hold your character together, they cannot destroy that. And you can walk through the fire as I did. And that's the title of my book, Walking Through the Fire. It's over my shoulder here somewhere. But you have to know that the Lord's walking with you and be confident that you every day do those things that you seek to do to please Him. And if you stand on those principles, you hold your character together, you can look yourself in the eye in the mirror every morning. And a lot of those folks can't look you in the eye. I'd rather be in that position than I would be in some lofty place with a lot of adulation I didn't deserve.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah, that's right. Your book was one of the first things I read before I decided to run for office, and I remember very well. When everything happened, in starting with that New York Times interview back in 2019, I think. Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because think about how much different the world is today versus just 6 years ago, right? I mean, everybody up to including the Speaker of the House took the New York Times at their word that it was accurate, and what the journalist was claiming was true, and it really happened. Think about if that were to happen today to a Republican politician, the level of skepticism that the people would have, right? Like the media has done such a fantastic job of blowing up their own credibility. It probably wouldn't happen today like it did. Plus, you'd have the foresight today to record the conversation yourself, which is one of the first lessons you taught me when I decided to run. You told me, like, download this app, put the big red dot on it. Anytime you start talking to a journalist, press the button and start recording, which served me well, by the way. And it's just remarkable how much times have changed. You were probably the first politician, at the national level to be subjected to a hit job like that, and it was effective, unfortunately. And then you were unfortunately replaced with one of the weakest congressmen in the entire country right now, which, as you pointed out, is exactly what the Branstad-Reynolds wing of the Republican Party wants. So they can push through all these boondoggles that they're trying to ram through at the moment. So it's unfortunate that we lost you we in that post, but you've also been doing a lot of great things since then as a private citizen, which I'm very excited to talk to you about here.
Yeah.
I don't know. Go ahead, Garth.
That's okay. One of the things I'm really looking forward to getting into is learning what you think are the best ways to fight against the pipeline and help restore liberty, but also to gain your insights on the Uniparty, both in DC, but not so much DC as here in Iowa, in terms of how legislation is controlled in the Iowa legislature. And so, I don't know which you would like to speak to first. I know that we're really concerned about the CO2 pipelines and getting that to a halt in Iowa. And I know, of course, that's going to have to do a lot with the people who control the legislative agenda in Des Moines. So what do you say to how can we make this a reality in terms of shutting this down?
Well, I can think of about three things to touch on the way to an answer to that question, Garth. One of them would be the most impressive full court press I had seen up to this point in my years in office, and the connection between business and government, and how those two things get pulled together to accomplish something. First, I'd say the World Economic Forum used to announce that they wanted to erase all the borders in the world and just more or less have a global universe where they can move cheap labor around as fast as they can click the mouse and send capital. And then they realized, and I read their stuff and I look into it, then they realized, well, no, and they said out loud, I say in print, we really do need government, because local government, we need them to do the things we can't do as a business. But what's going on here? We used to do the public-private partnership. Like King Construction moves into Odebolt and builds a park in there, a good chunk of it on the house, because it's a good thing for the community, and they couldn't convince themselves it was the right thing to do unless we went in and did some of that for free. So that was a good thing. That was a public-private partnership. We're glad to do it, and we gave back to the community as an example. But now it's the other way around. Now it's a private-public partnership. Now the private sector tells the government what to do, and they do it with the number of things, but it's campaign donation dollars, and it's a good old boy network, and it's the social piece of that. And the other side that's not spoken about is the stick part of the carrot and stick equation.
That's right.
They will go after and attack and destroy anybody that stands in their way. They'll do it in a subtle way. They'll do it they'll have their cabal of people within, say, the Iowa Senate caucus, the good old boys that are there. And then they begin to marginalize the folks that don't agree with them. The people that they're marginalizing, then they get muzzled. They shut up because they don't want to be more marginalized. And so that's another way that they get things done. I don't think people understand. They say, follow the money. Okay, follow the money because that's the trail. But watch the things about the networks of people that are going on too. So here's something that when I really saw this, what I was impressed was, I don't know, about a dozen years ago or so, I'm being lobbied by Mid-American, Warren Buffett's people, to approve the wind credit, the production tax credit for wind. And then that lobby is going on, and I'm not moving much. I'm listening to them. I listen to everybody. And well, that's going on. We're in a construction business, and we see up north of me around Shaler on the ridge, they're digging holes up there and pouring concrete on the high ground. One here, another one a quarter mile away there. Well, they're laying the foundations for wind turbines, and it's 25-foot deep hole poured full of concrete and rebar. So by September of that year, they had stopped. All the equipment pulled out, and here sat these empty pads. There's nothing else done. And like 2-3 months went by. Meanwhile, the lobbying's going on past the production tax credit. About the 4th of December that year, the tax extenders bill came through with the production tax credits in it, just as Warren Buffett would want. And the next day, equipment started showing up, tubes, towers, blades, generators, and they actually ran 24/7 with light plants, 100 and some feet into the air. And through that weather in the winter, in the December time, by December 31st, they had 100 wind turbines stood up, and they were turning, and they were the only company in America that cashed in on the production tax credit that year. That told me the coordination between the lobbying effort, the synchronization between all the logistics of the construction, and the things you have to do to make something light up like that's now drawing down hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. That's the network that's doing things. That took Democrats and Republicans lobbying power on both sides of the aisle, all the way up to the President of the United States, to be able to have access to the Oval Office, or at least the people that are talking to the president. And so that impressed me, not out of an admiration of the network, but not an appreciation for it. I'll put it that way. And so now we have a bigger thing going on here. So maybe I just speak to the Iowa or the state government side of this thing, and that is that. And I'm going to just name Bruce Rastetter's brainchild. And he hasn't always succeeded in things he's tried, but he has tried some grandiose things. And this is one of them. But and once the World Economic Forum pushed this thing through, and cap and trade came to America, and it got morphed into AOC's Green New Deal, which was then passed into law in Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, put these carbon credits in there, and that 45Q is $85 a metric ton for every ton of CO2 that you can sequester, pump down into the ground 6,000 feet deep into a sand bucket where it converts into carbonic acid and is supposed to sit there forever. It'll eat up the line. I can go on with that. But this boondoggle, these 2,500 miles of pipeline, networking 57 ethanol plants with the vision, I'm sure, of connecting every ethanol plant to lock in for at least 12 years a guaranteed return on this, that it took a network and an effort, and it came 2 plans actually. One of them was the summit proposal by Bruce Rastetter, and that was starting down in southeast Iowa, collecting the ethanol or the CO2 from the ethanol plants, going to the northwest up to North Dakota. And then there was another one, a competing proposal that was BlackRock. That was Larry Fink, 85% BlackRock invested in this thing called Navigators. They started in the northwest, up in South Dakota, and they ran their pipelines down to the southeast over into the oil fields in Illinois. These 2 pipelines were proposed. Both applications were made in a serious way for a long time. They ran parallel with each other in opposite directions and crossed each other at least 15 times. And I looked at that, and this is not a business model that makes any sense. You would not build 2 systems that way. Well, here was what I think happened. I think that they knew, the point of this really is this, that I think Larry Fink realized that he wasn't going to be able to get eminent domain through these states because they're red states with populist governors in them. And if a populist governor stands up and says no, you're dead in the water right there. So instead, it took a Republican to blaze the trail And I think Larry Fink was thinking, well, once he blazes the trail, then we'll come in and we'll build ours under the same framework, same format. But Larry Fink and BlackRock pulled out. But in any case, it was Bruce Rastetter's job to bulldoze their way through our constitutional right to property. And that took eminent domain in North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, Minnesota, not so much, and Nebraska didn't push back much at all. Hardly have any activity there at all. So he had the political connections. May I put it? I gave a speech in Bismarck here some time back, and it was 26 states represented there, the Northwest Landowners Association, and I said to them that Bruce Rastetter, that the governors and the legislative leadership within the states of North, South Dakota, and Iowa are wholly owned subsidiaries of Bruce Rastetter and Summit. And if there was a statement that brought the house down, that was it. So that's essentially what's happened. And we have members of our organization, Free Soil Foundation, that we created the organization to pull together all these states, anticipating that we're going to have to sue all the way to the Supreme Court in order to kill off this boondoggle. So we do weekly conference calls at a minimum, and then we do events. So I'm wired in with legislators North Dakota, South Dakota, and of course Iowa, and the leadership in North Dakota. There, it's an energy state anyway, and you had Doug Burgum, the former governor, up there, so they're driving this thing. We can have a piece of legislation that's introduced in North Dakota, and you hardly get a handful of votes on it because they're just all their own. And that means, of course, the leaders in the House and the Senate are owned, means the governor is owned. And the U.S. senators have been involved in this out of North Dakota for a long time, as we might say original perpetrators. Let's go to South Dakota. It was that way in South Dakota. Bruce Rastetter had Kristi Noem wrapped around his little finger. In fact, in her second inauguration, he and Jeff Broin, who is the CEO of Poet, they might be the largest ethanol producer in the country. I believe they are. Those two are the ones that funded her second inauguration. And it can go on and on about those connections they had. But Trump took Kristi Noem and put her in to be the director of Homeland Security. I guess it's Secretary of Homeland Security. And that pulled her out. Lieutenant Governor Larry Roden, he wasn't quite so signed into Rastetter, and that was helpful. And I can go back to that. But South Dakota was locked down by Rastetter and Summit. It's not anymore. Iowa is now, and the hinges are starting to come off a little bit of it. But in Iowa, we know where Governor Reynolds is on this. The network in Iowa is it's breathtaking how tight it's locked down. It is. You've got Terry Branstad. He and Bruce Rastetter have been locked together for a long time. These agendas go together. The Branstad political machine, it's significant. It's deployed for Rastetter's agenda. Terry Branstad is the senior policy advisor for Summit, and two of his sons are working for Summit. Then, plus, I mentioned the Vilsack connection of this. Former Governor Vilsack's son Jess is the lead counsel for Summit, and that doesn't mean he's the best attorney in the country, I don't think, but possible, I guess. Then you get to the state legislature, the majority leader in the Iowa House, Matt Winchell. He's been a friend for a long time. He's had my back. He's never turned on me that I know of, but neither does he allow legislation to get to the floor of the Iowa House. We had to go around him last year for one piece of legislation. Kevin was involved in that. I think you remember that. And then in the Senate side, it's even worse. 3 years in a row, the Commerce Committee has been used to kill all of our legislation that protects property rights. And the first year that happened, we had a bill that came over from the House. I say we because I wasn't working on it at that time. I say we inappropriately, I guess. But it was a bill that protected some property rights. I didn't like it because it said you have to have 90% signed up before you can use eminent domain to condemn the private property of the other 10. And I said, nobody's constitutional rights should be compromised because your neighbor took a check or a bribe from somebody. Your rights stand alone. But anyway, they passed it out of the House with a 78% vote, Democrats and Republicans. It was completely balanced demographically and politically. It hit the Senate. It went to the Commerce Committee. And there, they just refused to bring it up. They said we don't have the votes. They have a rule. They say in the Senate that if they don't have 26 Republicans in their caucus that'll vote for it, the bill doesn't come to the floor. In other words, they're not going to let a Democrat affect policy in any way. And that's just wrong. It's wrong for a lot of different reasons, but that was the excuse they used. And so that chairman, go ahead, Garth. I see you.
Yeah, so I have a question really quick. You said a rule. Is that a rule of the caucus that's actually formal, or is it just kind of the leadership saying, well, unless this in an informal way? Because here's where I'm really frustrated is that it seems like there's 3 to maybe 5 people within Iowa, depending on where they are, the governor for sure, the Senate leader and the House leader, and then maybe a couple of other committee leads, are able to control the agenda of what comes to the floor. And I'm curious, are those rules of the House that can be changed, or is it actually a constitutional issue in Iowa in terms of how bills get to the floor?
It's no, it's just I think it's a made up rule by the majority leader in the Iowa Senate, Jack Whitver. He just leads the place. He decides what bills come to the floor, and he's not challenged by the members, and so he's got that cabal around him that will always have his back. I don't know how big it is, but it's big enough. And so yeah, that's his rule. It's made up. If it wasn't the case when I was in the Senate, we had a 26 to 24 majority. So that would have given any one member so much power. If I would just say no, it's not coming to the floor, that would make me at least the de facto leader at the time. So no, it's made up. And interestingly, that you bring this up this way, that yesterday there was a vote on the floor of the Iowa Senate, an amendment to a bill brought by Tony Bisignano, who was a Democrat and a feisty one, by the way. He brought an amendment that provide a rule change for a discharge petition. And that discharge petition means that if it's 50 members of the Senate, if 26 of them sign that discharge petition, the bill has to come to the floor. So they put that up, and there were only 3 Republicans that voted for the discharge petition, and the rest of them voted against it. Not because they disagreed with it on some of their cases, they just didn't want to take the ire of the leader and assert some leadership. So I was this way. I looked at the leaders, and they're left driving their agenda, and they're running over us to drive their agenda. And I'm thinking, why in the world would I concede that their constituents deserve more representation than mine do? And why would I
Absolutely
play to the big donors and cash the checks and then decide who gets the money, who gets the donations? Those things are just wrong, and that's part of it. It fits a definition of corrupt. But it's politics, and it's just so hard to get people to open up to that and understand it. Here in the Iowa Senate, then you have that. You've got the first 3 years ago now, the chairman of the Commerce Committee said we don't have the votes and refused to bring up the bill that had a 78% passage rate in the Iowa House, and that actually fit the polling that was out there too. And then so that was 3 years ago. 2 years ago, or I guess it'd be last year, we had the chairman of the Commerce Committee was Waylon Brown, and he wouldn't bring any legislation through his committee. So we had, we didn't have, but it happened. People and friends and people we work with went to his house on 3:00 on a Sunday afternoon, went up on the stoop of his house and knocked on the door. 6 church ladies, and he wouldn't come to the door. I don't know if he was trembling inside or went into his safe room and locked the door or what. I don't know, but he didn't come to the door. He complained that they were harassing him. Well, he used to go out and knocked on hundreds of doors to get elected to office. I don't think there's anything wrong with knocking on somebody's door. So he did a little video there and asked him to consider that and put it up on YouTube. All right. Well, Waylon had heart palpitations for a whole week, and he couldn't show up to work. And so the bill that needed to come up that week, because it was funnel week, needed to be brought forward that by Friday of that week, did not get brought up. Well, the reason for that is because Waylon didn't show up. His vice chair, Mike Busolo, Senator Busolo, was the guy that should have been calling the meeting together. But he said, we're not having a meeting because we don't have a chairman. So he canceled the Commerce Committee meeting that week, and the bill died. This Mike Busolo is now this year. Well, Waylon then he bailed out and resigned his seat. I guess the pressure got a little too high. He said he took an offer he couldn't refuse, and well, I don't know about that. But anyway, so the successor chair for the Commerce Committee is Mike Busolo, who killed it the year before when Waylon Brown had heart palpitations. And I say that facetiously, of course. I don't think he had them. And then, so now our new chair, Mike Busolo, what's his background? Oh, he was chief of staff for Branstad. And let's see, he was also a hireling of Bruce Rastetter. That may have been, I'm not sure how recent it was when he took his last check, but it's sometime within the last, say, 6-7 years at least. Maybe much closer than that, and maybe he's on the payroll today for all I know. But he was on Bruce Rastetter's payroll, and in a conversation with an individual who was inside that camp, saw it happen and knew, Mike Brusolo's job as the now senator, chairman of the Commerce Committee, his job when he worked for Bruce Rastetter was to identify the PACs and other places where Bruce Rastetter could donate political campaign donations that was untraceable back to him, but to bring and exert the influence that he wanted to buy with his money. That was his job. And the other half of his job was to keep the phones scrubbed so they couldn't be subpoenaed and track the communications that were going on. That was his job. And so this is the guy that's the chairman of the Commerce Committee that's now in the process of every bill that comes over from every bill that's been introduced on that addresses the CO2 pipeline. And there's about 7 of them in the Senate. All he assigned to himself as a subcommittee chair, and he assigned one other Republican to that. He's a new senator. I don't know. I should be able to name him right now. I miss it. But both of those two guys are, I'll just say, they appear to be wholly owned by Bruce Rastetter. So they're killing all the legislation that's brought forward in the that's introduced in the Senate, and all the legislation that's in the House will go. The companion legislation will go to the Commerce Committee, where Bruce will assign them all to himself and kill them all himself. This is such naked interception of the will of we the people that I can't believe he can get away with this. I can't believe the press can't step in that thing and just expose all this. And there ought to be ethics charges brought up against Busolo because of the connections that he has. And how can he not recuse himself? You can even look at people that have worked for either Rastetter or Branstad, and I don't know anybody that's tied to both of them the same way. Oh, wait a minute. I do actually, but that's
Eric Helland.
Yeah, Eric Hill. That's another one. How can I forget that? Do you want to tell Kevin, or do you want me to? That's, I guess I will. That's Eric Hilton, the chairman of the Iowa Utilities Commission. Now, he was state representative for a while, and he lost an election, and so he went to Alaska. And there were rumors out there that there were reasons for him to pull out of the state for a while and let things cool down. It has cooled down. They're not talking about that so much anymore, but I do have a memory, And anyway, he went to Alaska, formed a company up there. This company is called, and it's still up and going, it's called 49th Summit Solutions. And he is the founder and the CEO of 49th Summit Solutions. And when I first started looking into this, you go right to their website, 49th Summit Solutions, and I don't think I did a screen cap of that. But it appears that they're in the business to broker Medicaid disputes for the state of Alaska. And I think it's legitimate that that's going on. And I read through a bunch of the minutes of the interviews he'd done just to make sure there was substance there, and there appeared to be. So in any case, he's up there doing that. All of a sudden, he's back down here in Iowa. Immediately, I believe they brought him back from Alaska to appoint him to the PERB board, the Public Employees Relations Board. $94,000 a year for that job. They plant him in there, but he can't be confirmed because they still remember why he left the state, I believe, in the Senate. And then, so she pulled him out and plugged him in as an interim appointment, kept him there until he's sitting on that board with the payroll, of course, kept him going, and then appointed Eric Helland to chair the Iowa Utilities Commission. And when that happened, a reliable Democrat, Jerry Huser, a person who I've respected for a long time, was the chair. She resigned, and it appears to be in protest, although she didn't say anything. And so Eric Helland is the chair, and right away that resigned seat that was made by Jerry Huser was plugged in a lady named Sarah Martz, and nobody knows anything about her, but she was confirmed 50-0, and Eric Helland was finally confirmed just last year in the last days of April by a vote of, he got 38 votes out of that. You have to carry 2/3. So they lost 12, and another 5 would have killed him off. But no one, the chairmanship, the CEO of 49th Summit Solutions, was not known to the senators at the time they voted, at least not to the president of the Senate, and I can say that with confidence, nor the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. Neither one of them knew that Eric Helen was even at the current time, the CEO of 49th Summit Solutions, when they're voting on a guy that they know is going to be ruling on Summit's boondoggle. And he has, and he's ruled in each time, every decision in significant favor of Summit's application, and without regard to the Iowa law that requires convenient and necessary before this program can be moved forward, without regard to the property rights that are in our Constitution, Iowa's Constitution, or the case law precedents that are there. And he has also 3 times refused to allow me to testify before the Iowa Utilities Commission on this CO2 pipeline. Once as an individual that applied to intervene and speak, which has been a standard practice in all the other applications going back in history. The second time, I formed a group of about 8 of us that are called the King Interveners. We have different interests in property and lands, that we came together and applied to intervene. He denied that, just summarily denied it. And the third time was the worst, when I was, I'll say, commissioned by the Hennings Family Trust because to testify on their behalf in resistance to the eminent domain they want through their land east of Sioux City. Carol Hennings had heart surgery the week before, open heart surgery the week before, and asked me to testify in the slot that she had reserved for herself. And so I spent a lot of time getting ready for that in a cram course. And I went down there. I was approved. She called down. They said yes. They put a witness tag around me, called me up into the agenda, and Eric Helen, ready to take the oath, and seated, ready to take the oath. And Eric Helen said, what are you doing here? And I said, I'm here to represent the Hennings Family Trust. Carol Hennings had, and I didn't even get it. He says, we're aware of that. We're going into closed session. And they pulled out, walked behind the curtain. About 5 minutes later, he came back, sat down, and said, I'm going to be consistent here. You're not going to be allowed to testify. There was no consistency except Steve King doesn't testify before this committee. It's the only consistency. I opened my mouth to rebut it, and he essentially said, you're not allowed to speak. Some words to that effect. And they cut my mic. Well, I've been in that arena a few times. I turned my mic back on, and I said, I'll see you in court. And he said, what? And I said it even louder the second time. I will see you in court before they cut my mic again. And so we'll see him in court. We've sued him in state court and federal court, and under the Free Soil Directive of this, but also the King Interveners. And that tells you how bad it is. You've got the governor, the majority leaders in the House and in the Senate in Iowa, the past governor, the past ambassador to China, connecting his China connections here, and Bruce Rastetter and his minions, as many as 20 lobbyists in the Capitol in Pierre a year ago. I don't know how many in Iowa today. I haven't counted them, but they're everywhere all the time. And their plea is, don't change the rules on us in the middle of the game. It isn't right to change the rules on us in the middle of the game, but they've been changing the rules. At least this agenda has, back more than 15 years ago in North Dakota. They bragged about it and wrote a letter to say so. And then, that's leadership. And they've been changing the rules. They changed the law in South Dakota a year ago, and the people rose up and changed it back this year. And in Iowa, they've been trying to move legislation. One of them was a blank check for Summit, I called it. SB, I don't remember the number, 411, maybe that's what it was. Senate File 411. It was a mushy thing that just allowed, anything through the fence. And what is this? And I wrote up an opinion on that. But the people that were lobbying for that bill, Senate File 411, they said, we're writing this so that Johnson County, Iowa City, can't ban gas stoves. That was their argument. But what it really was they wanted license to do whatever they wanted to do. And so when it came up in the House, our wise representative there, I better not even blame him for this, but it was smart. He just brought an amendment that said pipelines are exempt from this law. And then everybody pulled their support off of it. We knew what it was. It took the clothes off the emperor. And so I can just go on with this stuff, but you get the flavor of how corrupt it is. And I didn't call it corrupt 2 years ago, but it's utterly corrupt. And some of the corrupt politicians, when they look in the mirror in the morning, by now they've justified their actions. They don't see themselves as corrupt anymore. They see themselves as virtuous and benefactors to we the people. They've rationalized it. And on my days when I'm not very forgiving, I go, you can rationalize anything. And criminals rationalize almost everything they do. And if you want to go completely to the extreme, you might just say, well, Jeffrey Dahmer was hungry.
Yeah. It's interesting how different the outcome has been in South Dakota versus Iowa, right? I mean, and by the way, I think we are where we are today, and I think the people seem to be winning this fight at the moment solely because President Trump took Kristi Noem off the chessboard when he pulled her up to be the DHS secretary, because I don't think she would have signed this eminent domain bill into law if she were still in the office. But it's remarkable how different the legislatures in both states reacted to this issue, right? Where in Iowa, our state government is just bought and paid for by Summit, and in South Dakota it took a very different approach. And this at least it appears to me right now, and I'm really curious to get your perspective, given like the actions of the past couple of weeks. But it seems to me that like Summit, like their effort to build a pipeline is basically dead at this point. They don't have a path forward, solely because of what's happening in South Dakota. Maybe I'm wrong, but had the people not tossed almost every pro pipeline legislator in the Republican primary last summer, someone would probably be laying pipeline right now in unwilling family farms property, right? Because we didn't have the political will in this state to do what the people of South Dakota did.
That's a pretty good summary, I think, Kevin. I'm a great big fan of what South Dakota has accomplished over the last year or a little more. And I've been up there a number of times to speak, and I'll be back. I've got 2 more events to do in South Dakota. One of them is in Brookings and another one is in Rapid City. They appreciate the people we sent up there and the attempt to help them, but they did most of it on their own. And it just, Carla Lems was stepped forward and a real leader, and now she's the Speaker Pro Tem of the House in South Dakota. When they unseated 14 Republican sycophants of Rastetters and replaced them with property rights constitutionalist Republicans, and they took over the leadership in the South Dakota House and the South Dakota Senate. So another one that's impressed me a lot is Mark Lapka. We've worked with these 2 people going back 2.5 years, something like that. And he's a cattleman up there, and he just wants to farm and raise cattle. And he was more or less drafted to run for the Senate. He's a reluctant senator, but he's a wise man, and he's impactful, and he's respected. And he was really I think the anchor in the Senate to get their legislation done that just simply bans eminent domain for CO2 pipelines in South Dakota. Boom, nice, clear. And I got to tweak that a little bit, so it makes me feel good. But they'd have done it without me. And anyway. That's the South Dakota's movement there. You're right. If Kristi Noem were there, I have any doubt she would have vetoed that bill. And I don't know, under these circumstances, they would have brought the bill, but they did so much more. They've got a referendum system up in South Dakota where if the legislature passes a bill that's wrong, which they did, they passed a bill that took away the property right provisions for local government and handed it over to the 3 members of the Public Utilities Commission, their counterpart to Iowa Utilities Commission, and with directions that said, essentially, ignore the input that comes from your counties and comes from the people. Here's your rules that you have to live by, which more or less said they had to, by law, then award the eminent domain for the CO2 pipelines. So they reversed that law with the referred law. They call it RL 21 that just repealed it. And that took 17,000 signatures on a petition to get that on the ballot. And they produced some 35,000 signatures. And so that tells you, and they had a network of social media, every connection of social media you can think of, from X to Facebook to Instagram to all the things out there. They had that all going. They had events going on. They had people that were knocking doors and making phone calls and running some ads. But they got outspent something like 5-1, and still won all but one county. I think it's 67 counties in South Dakota. 66 of them went the way of we the people. Garth?
So I'm interested in us like trying to figure out what was the difference in the people in South Dakota versus we the people here in Iowa, and why our movement hasn't been as strong of opposition as they were able to accomplish in South Dakota. Any thoughts there?
Well, I do, and it's just a basic analysis of this that when I was in the Iowa Senate, I was working to get more voice for the rural areas, and because the Golden Dome in Des Moines runs so much of the state, and Cedar Rapids and the metro centers, because it's reflective on proportion of the population. And South Dakota's proportion of population is significantly more rural in ratio than it is in Iowa. So we're pushing back against the urban. Sometimes it's urban opposition. Sometimes it's urban apathy. And I know that there's an effort in Iowa now to reach the message out to the urban people because they're not paying attention. Oh, that's rural stuff, and so they don't move. But I've been telling them if they can pull this off, if they can condemn farmland for a private sector CO2 pipeline that you and I can't even buy a share in, only the elite investors can buy into that. And that's a fact, by the way. If they can do that, then they can come into your home, your yard, plant a wind turbine in your backyard and put solar panels on your roof, and there will not be a thing you can do about it. They can come in and take your gas stove out and lay $50 bill on the counter, and nothing you can do about it. They can roll your internal combustion engine car, pull it off with a wrecker, and leave you a deposit for an EV, and there won't be a thing you can do about it if they can take your land to do this. And hopefully that will wake up some people in the cities.
Right. Well, and it speaks to, I guess, the broader issue that we've encountered since, trying to be more politically active in state level issues is, apathy is an issue. And just our representation, I'm not going to go so far as to say that Iowa is a fascist state, but when you've got government and big business kind of running the show, isn't that that's kind of the direction that we're heading? But how do we, and I guess, is there someone, I look to you certainly for leadership to help put together some sort of campaign or some sort of movement in Iowa to recruit and get elected true conservatives? Because and since John Jacobson is close personal friend of mine, love John, since he's been gone, I feel like our slide into the Uniparty has just been consistent. And how do we turn that around? And part of Garth and I have been very active in politics, even in our Pot County, and I find myself being very frustrated because we got involved in a dispute some years back, and I started reading the Iowa Constitution, or the Republican Party Constitution for the state of Iowa, as well as Potawatomi County, and it was eye-opening to me because I realized that the way our political process worked was backwards. It's supposed to start, and I know I'm kind of idealistic, but it's supposed to start at the people level, and then we choose representatives for the county level and then for the state level, and we send it on up. And I was dismayed to find out it works just the opposite. Like, all the decisions are made in Des Moines as far as who's going to run for this and run for that. And we're kind of given our politicians to vote for the House or the Senate. At least that's the way I view it. And that's not the way it's supposed to work. And I know that's idealistic, but it's also very frustrating. It's like, how do you fight against that? And how do you
I think there's one answer to that problem, and it's a big part of the reason that there was such a disparity in the outcomes in South Dakota versus Iowa, right? And that's voter apathy. We have as Steve's been saying, the Republican establishment in the state of Iowa is completely and utterly corrupt, right? We've got four of the weakest members of Congress in the entire country in this state who pose as conservative Republicans, but are anything but. We've got a state Senate that's been co-opted by this particular special interest. And meanwhile, when we ran a Republican primary last summer, only 9% of registered voters bothered to show up, right? And that's because the state establishment does nothing to encourage voter participation in the primary because, frankly, they don't want it, right? Only after they've rammed through their nominees, right, and they've won, then the machine kicks into motion, right? And then, come November, the voters, they sleepwalk into the voting booth, they pull the lever for the candidate with the R next to his or her name, and then they pat themselves in the back for doing their civic duty, when the real civic duty is actually exercising some judgment on who their party should nominate in May or June. But not nearly enough people do that, right? And until that changes, until we actually get into at least mid double-digit percentages voter participation in the primary, we're going to keep having the same problem. South Dakota didn't have that problem because, as Steve points out, their state population is 20 to 25% the size of Iowa's, and the people there were highly energized by what Summit did to they had court ordered incursions onto private property, which infuriated people there, and they generated enough of movement. They were able to toss all of these bought and paid for politicians. But there's no such thing happening in Iowa because the establishment is doing everything they can to run interference for the interests that own them. So until I think it's incumbent on groups like ours to boost those engagement rates. I mean, we're going to keep having the same problem. It isn't. This isn't a legal issue or a procedural issue. It's a voter participation issue. It's a voter apathy issue.
I would just add to that, and certainly I agree. That's the party, the Republican Party, the machinery of that is also the machinery that Rastetter's fingers are in all the way in, and they're in there because they pay homage to the governor. The governor runs the party, and Terry Branstad, the former governor, his relationship with Governor Reynolds, he groomed her for something like 7 years, and now that she's been governor for a number of years. Something else happens, the power goes to your head, and you begin to think that you're deserving of all that power and that you become more and more elite in your own mind. I always tried to shed that off and be as regular a guy as I could. And I've had help do that. My wife, for example, takes care of my humility for me. So that's been helpful. But so if you look at the machinery that's here in the state, the people have been groomed because they're the ones that will say yes and that they can tell them what to do. Randy Feenstra is very clearly one of those people that Rastetter can tell him exactly what to do, and he will do it to the best of his ability, even though he's not particularly capable. When he was the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee in the Iowa Senate, he made a pledge to his constituents in very conservative Sioux County area, and that there'd be no expansion of gambling coming through the Ways and Means Committee while he's the chair, and he controls the agenda in that committee. Well, that was his pledge to the people. And the gambling lobby that had brought that bill that he blocked, the next year they wrote a bill that advanced gambling even more in the state. And so Randy Feenstra called that bill up in his Ways and Means Committee, and they debated it. He voted for it in committee. So the bill went to the floor, and on the floor vote, they had enough Democrats to pass it. So he voted against it on the floor. And when he got called out on that, he told his constituents, well, I voted against it. Well, he's the one that enabled it. If there's any one person that enabled that and voted for it in committee to make that happen, it was Randy Feenstra. That's the kind of duplicity. And then I'll say the other side of this thing, well, not really the other side, but I recall when there was Bruce Rastetter and Branstad and that whole network. They were on my side when I was running against Kristi Vilsack, Tom Vilsack's wife. And that was against the whole Obama administration. It was all his cabinet came out, and you had Bill Clinton that came out and stood on 4th Street in Sioux City and gave a speech for Kristi Vilsack. It was a big old deal. Well, Branstad's people were behind me, and Rastetter was behind me. They didn't want to see Kristi Vilsack be a member of Congress, and so that was fine. And then I was inadvertently included on an email between Bruce Rastetter and his chief of staff. At that time, it was Joe Murphy. And it had to do with immigration. They'd try to get me to agree to open borders and introduce me to Hispanics as if I didn't recognize that they were human. And it was just kind of disgusting when you think about how biased they must have thought I was. But anyway, the email that I was inadvertently included on said, well, it looks like King didn't get the message. Guess we'll have to send another one. That's the first clue that they were going to turn this thing all around the other way, and they did. And I saw it in the eyes of one of his pack managers as well, the eye of the wolf, which I've only seen one other place in my life. So that they do those things. I believe when Chris Conoyer was chosen as lieutenant governor by Governor Reynolds to be the lieutenant governor, she had a state senate seat over at Clinton over in eastern Iowa. And of course, that created a vacancy. When the last time we had a vacancy that required a special election in the Iowa Senate, it was 42 days from the resignation to the special nominating convention. This one, they jammed it to 18 days. I believe it was 18, might have been 16. Well, in that convention, they chose two candidates for the establishment, and they thought, we can't lose because either one of them will do what we want them to do. And but a surprise candidate emerged, and her name is Katie Whittington. And she emerged. She had a pretty good footprint there and won that because they split the vote of the delegates to the other two candidates. And she came out with actually a majority. And I think it was the first ballot. So that surprised the establishment. And then essentially nothing happened from the party. And I won't go through the whole story, but I'm convinced they threw the election to the Democrat and gave up a seat in the Iowa Senate to the Democrats rather than have someone in there that was opposed to the CO2 pipeline. And that was her agenda, just like it was your agenda, Kevin. And and you experienced this thing with an intensity that I don't know that I can describe.
Yeah, the Katie Whittington story is wild because, my understanding is, and I watched this happen, and not only did the party not support her, they actually sabotaged her. There's testimony out there that there are some young people that were going to go out and walk and knock on doors on her behalf, and the Republican Party of Iowa gave these kids bad lists with bad data, with a lot of Democrats on the list to make their outing completely ineffective, right? Jeff Kaufman, who was openly supporting DeSantis before he had to go out and like eat crow and support Trump. Didn't even bother to go on Simon Conway's show on WHO the day of the election to try to get out the vote for her. Even meanwhile, the chair of the Democrat Party was out there openly stumping for their candidate. And my understanding is that if you look at the electoral math in the Senate, I think the Branstad-Rastetter wing realized that bringing it would actually be better for them to have a Democrat come in to that seat than to have a MAGA conservative Republican come into that seat, because while the Republican Party might have a clear majority in the Senate, the gap between the conservative wing and the bought and paid for Rastetter wing is actually razor thin.
Mm-hmm. And you take this. So that's an example of the state Senate. You're a living example of the congressional race, Kevin. And if we take this, I've mentioned the U.S. senators from North Dakota in particular. It's less clear if you go into South Dakota Senate, but I think it exists. And it exists. I don't know if it's as strong as it is in North Dakota as far as they all in on the CO2 pipeline. Here in Iowa, we haven't heard anything from Chuck Grassley. We just know that Lee Blank, the CEO for Summit, was in his office last week, along with more or less, I'll say, a full court press of the Summit people all over the Hill, according to the reports that I've gotten. And we've got the Iowa delegation, all four of them, that has been, and others of the Corn Belt, all over the Hill lobbying for their 45Q credit. Here's the one that's just breathtaking to me, and that is that, and these folks that are trying to save our country from a demolishing style of debt that's coming at us. I stay in contact with them regularly, and they had a bill that was a debt ceiling bill. This is back when Kevin McCarthy was the Speaker of the House, and of course I didn't support him, but they had a debt ceiling bill that they wanted to leverage that refused to increase the debt ceiling under Biden unless we were able to cut a bunch of spending that needed to be spent. And the bill was drafted to strip out all of these carbon credits and more or less just shut down the whole Green New Deal. Everybody in the Republican conference in the U.S. House of Representatives, more or less, I'll say this, more or less unanimously agreed to this. They're ready to move the bill to the floor. And that means that the Iowa delegation didn't say anything or conceded that. Then I used the wrong day on this before, but it was to come to the floor on a Wednesday. And so that day it started, and at 2:30 in the morning of Wednesday, Zach Nunn said so on Simon Conway's radio program. It isn't just me with back channel information, which is probably more reliable than what you hear on the radio station. But anyway, he let us all know this, that he and the rest of the Iowa delegation, that includes Randy Feenstra, were in Speaker McCarthy's office at 2:30 that morning, demanding that those credits be put back into the bill to fund this Green New Deal. And I use the example virtually pounding on McCarthy's desk at 2:30 in the morning, demanding that hundreds of billions of credits be put into the bill. And he had to have those votes because the majority was so thin. So he put the credits back in the bill in order to move the debt ceiling bill, or the government would have been shut down. That's how far they were willing to go. And nobody that knows any of these people thinks that any one of them woke up and thought, you know what, we really ought to do this. This is a good idea. No. This was, I would lay a junky old farm on this, that this was a phone call from Bruce Rastetter. And that's all.
But not only that, I mean, just to add Paul Harvey's rest of the story here, look at the FEC records and look at who made I think it was a $25,000 donation to Feenstra's reelection campaign less than a week before that vote. I mean, Rastetter donated to every House Republican candidate, but he gave $25,000 to Feenstra just days before Feenstra walked into McCarthy's office and basically held the proverbial gun to his head on this bill.
That's right. And in fact, I'd say the number was 26,600. Not to.
That's right. Right.
But I think you gave me that number. So
yeah, I didn't have total
here's
number, but I was directionally accurate. Yeah, exactly.
The max donation that he could give for the political campaign was $6,600. That went into Feenstra's campaign, and then $20,000 went into his PAC, which he calls the Delivers PAC. As Feenstra delivers, well, he delivers first for.
He delivered all right.
That's for sure. Yeah. And also, if you look at the other three members of the Iowa delegation, they also got a $6,600 check at the same time, and at least one of them got at least $10,000 in their PAC. I don't know the names of those PACs, so I can't quite pull that out to tell you the rest. But I have to believe if they have a PAC, it got a decent donation, no less than $10,000. But Feenstra got 20. That must mean that he's the guy that took the call. I'm just guessing. I don't have any fact beyond that on it. That's just some of the money. Then, same time, just like so at the same time, $6,600 went into all four members of the Iowa congressional delegation's account from Paul Singer, a business associate co-investor of Rastetter's and identified as the #1 vulture capitalist in America. And he's the guy that reportedly put $28 million into accounts that were controlled by Kevin McCarthy. So you can kind of figure out who's calling the shots to Kevin McCarthy and the Speaker of the House, and how that gets networked in with Bruce Rastetter and his agenda. When Paul Singer makes, I ask this 4 times in public meetings of Summit, is Paul Singer an investor in Summit? And they will, we don't know. We'll find out. And the next day, I ask him at the next meeting, and the next meeting. Next time I said, I'm going to give you one more time. You're going to come back with the truth and tell me whether Paul Singer is an investor or not. The next time I asked him, I was in the city of Jewel, by the way, when that happened. And they said, well, we don't know. And I said, you've had 4 meetings to get the answer to this. We all know. You have confirmed Paul Singer is an investor, and I'm running with that. And so that's some more of this network, how bad it is, how big it is. It's probably global. It's certainly national, and it's connected with the major donors and the influence so that they can tell the Speaker of the House what to do with one phone call. That's what happened.
So, question I have to kind of, I guess, wrap up the discussion is, just hearing all these details and facts and figures, I feel a little bit like David in the story of David and Goliath. Yet we know who won that battle. So do you have three smooth stones? 1, 2, 3 things that we can do in Iowa to fight against this or make a difference?
Garth can do it with
Well,
one.
before you give us the shape of your three stones, I mean, there's things that I've heard in this conversation so far, and I'm wondering which one will give us the most bang for our effort. One is to try and put together the legislation or whatever it would require to be able to have a referendum like they do in South Dakota. The other possibly is, the effort to actually put together a real freedom caucus, a state freedom caucus in the legislature. Or three, just the grassroots efforts in counties to pass county ordinances and force kind of a constitutional crisis or something here in Iowa, where it's counties versus the state government. Or yeah, I guess maybe those are the three possible smooth stones. But what do you think, Steve?
I wrote every one of those down so I won't forget them. I like them all. That's why I tipped my head down here. We don't have a bill that brings forth a referendum process. And I said that yesterday we lost the bill that would have given a discharge petition, which would have let the majority of the Senate force a bill to the floor. The referendum process, I think we want to bring that, and we want to bring it this year and force Summit to lobby against it. I'm sure they will. And that's so they can burn some of their capital doing that. The Freedom Caucus piece, I have approached that, and I put a lot of effort into trying to establish a Freedom Caucus here in Iowa. But what I got back was, even though we have them in different places around the country and places with, I'll say, less voice than of conservatives than we have, they just didn't light up their organizer at the national level. But now the new chair of the Freedom Caucus is Andy Harris. He's a terrific friend, and I just texted him a couple of days ago, and he came back to me and he said, we're trying as best we can to kill off this 45Q. That's a good idea. The establishment ought to make another run at it. The third thing is the counties, and we do have a pretty good organization of counties. Steve King out of Shelby County is the lead voice of county supervisors, and he has taken this thing apart, and he's written it's a one-pager that tells the county supervisors, this is what you can do. And he said, this is what we did. I don't tell them what to do. I just tell them what they can do. Bremer County, Corey Serwinski over there has picked this up and added more to it as well. And they passed these resolutions in multiple counties, but they can be zoning ordinances on there that say it can't be within, say, 500 feet of a culvert and a number of those things. If they can tie them up in some knots that way, and that is going on in the counties. So those are all good stones to throw. The one we're in the process of throwing, and the one I kind of dribbled out on the Freedom Caucus, but I can start that up again. It'll take some time. But the referendum bill, we ought to write that and get it going. So I'm glad you put all those things in there. They're going to bring out some change. Garth?
Yeah, I am interested a little bit. So the Freedom Caucus, and we don't have to get into this too much, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. I mean, Trump has been doing a brilliant job of defeating Freedom Caucus members in the House. And I'm really talking about, and maybe you're talking about the same thing as well, Andy Roth's organization, the State Freedom Caucus, which I guess Andy Biggs was big in helping with that effort. So trying to get their attention and say, we need a state freedom caucus here in Iowa to break this cabal. And I mean, it's one of the stones, but so are you familiar with Andy Roth and the State Freedom Caucus?
His name rings my bell, but his face doesn't come to mind. There are a couple other, the executive director there is, oh gosh, I don't want to try to guess at his name, but I know that he's very good friends with my former chief of staff and the former executive director of the Conservative Opportunity Society, which I chaired for 16 years. That was a handpicked group that I think they're at least as reliable as conservatives. So there's a lot of cross-pollination between that and the Freedom Caucus. So that's the path I would go with the people that I know. But going right to Andy Harris and saying, just make this happen. That's the easiest way to do it. And he's got the leverage to do it now. He's also an appropriator, chairing on a subcommittee, and that gives him a lot of leverage on killing off appropriations to this boondoggle. But there's on top of that, my former legislative director, which would be second in command in my shop, is Sue Ann Edmiston, and she's the executive director for the Freedom Caucus in Arizona. Louis Gohmert's former chief of staff, Connie Hare, is the executive director for the Freedom Caucus in Louisiana. And so I spent 2.5 hours on the phone the other night with Sue Ann, and I wish she were my daughter, and she's so terrific. But so those connections are there. It's not hard to light that up. I just need to turn some attention to it. But the referendum thing, that's an idea that we can probably start to move that right away, and we should. It's not in our list of things we're doing. We do have legislation about, I suppose, 7 or 8, maybe, I think it's 9 bills that have been introduced in the Iowa legislature that are designed to protect our property rights and at least shut down the eminent domain for a CO2 pipeline. All of those introduced in the Senate are essentially killed because they're in Bruce Hallow's chair of the subcommittee to do that, self-assigned. In the House, they're out of committee, and they will, I believe, go to the floor. But it's going to be a little hard to get them to the floor. We haven't seen Matt Winchell rise up and oppose them this time. There seems to be a presumption that he's not going to, but he did last year, and we had to go around him. So we'll see what happens. But then here's another stone. I would take one of those stones and I would zing that around, put it right between the eyes of Rastetter. He's got to be demonized publicly so people understand the poisonous element that he is, the grandiose poisonous element of Rastetter. He has used every single tool possible to advance this. He's sued in state courts in all of the states that are affected. He's sued in federal courts in the states that are affected. He's sued landowners. He sued the commission, one of the Public Utilities Commission in South Dakota. He's suing her now, trying to get her off the board because he doesn't like the decision he thinks that she's gonna make. He's sent out at least 8 cease and desist letters, which say, shut up or I'll sue you for everything you've got. I got one of them. And I just said, well, you didn't like that. Here's some more. I'm just pushing it back at them. It's more or less, I dare you. You want to come after me and take my house? Okay. You want to take my my investments? Go do that. Just try and garnish my Social Security check, boys. I'll move in with one of my sons or something, and I'm not gonna back up and give up my constitutional rights to freedom of speech, because and it's happening. There are 3 media outlets that I know of that got a cease and desist contact order, and it looks to me like it has at least semi-muzzled a couple of them. I know one of them it is just completely shut down. There will not be a word about CO2 pipelines and Summit and Bruce Rastetter come out of there. They're just completely muzzled. That's just outrageous. And by the way, I don't respect people that cave in that easy, but that's why these things can happen, because people back up, they cave in. One dinky little letter, I'll sue you. And by the way, even the letter, I got accused of saying that Summit was 100% Chinese owned. And I don't think that Bruce Rastetter's Chinese, but Terry Branstad kind of looks that way. But he says he's Norwegian, so I'm gonna take his word for it.
Well, Smithfield and Syngenta are Chinese owned, and aren't they both investors in Summit?
Well, I made that allegation in one of those meetings, and their top lawyer, Brett Dublinsky, came around the back of the room and he whispered in my ear. Lee Blank was in the building, I understand, at the time. He said, well, I just checked. He said, they're not investors. I just wanted to let you know. I didn't want to embarrass you publicly. But here's what I remember. This is what I'm basing off of, was a website where it said our partners. And on that screen was John Deere, Harry Stein Feeds. He's got a big investment going on in China himself. Smithfield, Syngenta, LS2, the large lobbying firm out of Des Moines that has been lobbying hard for Rastetter and Summit. All those things were on the same page that said our partners, with their logos popped up on there. I searched mightily for that, and I can't find it. And I even went to the Wayback Machine, and I don't find it in there. Now, maybe I needed to look in some other corner I didn't find. But that's pretty sound basis if you say our partner. And John Deere is listed in a press release as being an investor. but they're there in a partner in equal standing with Harry Stein and with Smithfield, with Syngenta. Both of those, Smithfield and Syngenta, 100% Chinese owned. And I believe they are investors. They might be partners in some other fashion, but I don't know what you need hogs for in order to pump CO2 to North Dakota. So that's how that thing goes. Then let's see. And TPG Rise, that's an investment fund. And okay, who runs that thing? Well, that happens to be Henry Paulson, the former Secretary of the Treasury under George W. Bush, Goldman Sachs guy. I probably know that personally, Kevin, and I dealt with him personally. I never saw anybody exude less self-confidence than Henry Paulson and feign it. But anyway, he's the CEO there. That's a global operation going on. But Silk Road, 100% Communist Chinese Party Silk Road, dropped $300 million into TPG Rise. And shortly after that, TPG Rise put $300 million into Summit. So
there you go.
Chinese investors.
So they've got the Chinese Communist Party in their cap table.
Yeah. So it was in, well, I don't know if they said it was in dollars, but it might have been converted from yuans. In fact, I bet it was. And on top of that, Rastetter has Chinese investments down in Brazil and Chinese investors in Brazil. He built a partnership down there with FS Fiagro, turned it into FS Bioenergia. And with that, they built at least 2 ethanol plants. Some reports say 3. He says they're putting 600 million gallons of ethanol into the marketplace annually down there now out of Brazil. And he's going to say ethanol up here in the Corn Belt, but he's the number 1 competitor. And on top of that, he got a permit to drill a well to see if they can sequester CO2 right at the ethanol plants in Brazil. Nobody's drilled a well like that at any ethanol plant up here in the upper Midwest, but they did it down there. So I think he's his approach is not looking at these other alternatives like we can produce methanol at each ethanol plant. We can convert that into green jet fuel at each ethanol plant. We can use the CO2 to actually do that and qualify for some credits at the same time. No pipeline required. His overall objective here is to establish I'll call it a quasi-monopoly on the CO2 coming from the ethanol plants where they're concentrated the most. And of course, it's Iowa, but it's the Corn Belt. That's what his overall mission is, and the moves they make are about securing that. And why doesn't he buy ethanol plants? He doesn't need to. He can control them. He can buy them on.
That's right.
So
and what's ironic is the ethanol plants could do much better if they just found different ways to monetize that CO2 on site. They don't need the pipeline, but that's what he's desperate to prevent them from finding out.
That's right. And but I'm not convinced that he's completely been killed off here. I think we need to put him out of his misery. But the organ, think about it like a human body, and you've got vital organs. Well, one of the vital organs of his boondoggle scheme is South Dakota, and that vital organ now is shut down. And I don't know how much longer he can live without finding an alternative, or let's say a mechanical heart or something. But he's got about 3 alternatives, and none of them are very good at all. But he could go through Minnesota, which doesn't allow eminent domain. Maybe they change the law in Minnesota to do this, or maybe he can bribe enough people that he can do ziggity zaggity up to North Dakota through around the landowners that refuse to get there. If that's the case, you still have to come back to the Iowa Utilities Commission, I believe, and I would argue have to restart their permit request. Another path is there's a tall grass pipeline that goes across Nebraska from about, I'll say, Omaha area straight west to Wyoming. I checked on that. That would take about 32 additional miles of pipeline in Iowa that they tell me that they have somehow secured the easements to that, or it won't take eminent domain, however that description works. And so I checked on that for the North Dakota people, and they said it's possible to send that CO2 to Wyoming, turn it around, and bring it back to North Dakota on a pipeline. There's a pipeline that they just built that's been lit up about a year ago that could facilitate that, they tell me. So there's 2 things that he might still try to do with this. And then the third one is a great big reach, but it's in Washington. I just remember that the Alaska pipeline back in 1972, I believe it was, maybe 71, 72. They was shut down by environmentalist lawsuits. And Congress in 74 passed a law that nullified all the lawsuits and declared the pipeline to be a national emergency and for national security reasons, and commanded that they go forward and build that pipeline. And any lawsuit that was pending 30 days from enactment was their null and void. So they opened that up, but Alaska is a lot different when it comes to eminent domain. There's so much public land up there, but they did use eminent domain in Alaska. And so that's maybe something they would try to do. I think that's a very, very heavy lift now that global warming hoax is coming apart globally.
Right. I guess we spent a lot of time talking about this, and I don't want to take up too much more time on it. But one question I've never been able to understand, and maybe I'm being naive here, but look, my sole objection to this pipeline is the eminent domain issue and property rights, right? I've got no problem with anybody building a business. But why doesn't Summit just build this alongside county or state roads? Like if the Iowa State, the establishment is so keen to see this thing built, why not just build this pipeline alongside Route 20? Or alongside, county roads on state-owned or county-owned land instead of insisting on, receiving involuntary easement rights from property owners.
Well, that's a question that I used to not have any answer for, and I don't have a real good answer for it. I'll try it, Kevin. And that is that they want 100 foot of construction right away, and they want 50 foot of right away maintained afterwards for that. So it's more or less that 50 foot isn't going to work within a road right away. That the 100 foot certainly won't work within a road right away. Second one is that the counties actually do have authority on that easement right, and a lot of those counties are not going to do that. So those are they aren't the best answers, but it's the answers that get you to the full answer, I think. And by the way, you don't get to go straight through catty-cornered across everybody's pattern tile and through those farms, and of course that cuts hundreds of miles out of it when you just go beeline without regard to property lines or anything. And by the way, there's a state law that says under a railroad you can only run a pipeline underneath there perpendicular to the tracks. That was just kind of an interesting thing that I saw. So they're restrained a little bit by that.
Sure. Yeah, I don't profess to have any expertise on this. It just I've always wondered why that would seem to be a lot easier to get done, rather than collecting thousands of easement agreements.
Uh-huh.
Or even, I know even less than you, Kevin, but even the power, we've got these giant power lines that are running all over the state. Those obviously have easements, but I don't know. Obviously, they're not looking.
They're also not going. Power lines aren't going to leak and potentially suffocate an entire town either.
And to speak to that too, by the way, when you ask about the Bay of America, the Gulf of America, excuse me, I woke up to the Gulf of America for 28 days, so the month of February, and looking out across the Gulf, we have our place down there. We rent one for about a month out of the year, and we're right there looking on the Gulf side in the Keys. So the Gulf of America. But let's see. I don't know why I got off my own track here on what needed to be said, but I better let you guys ask another question. I shouldn't have lost that. The Gulf of America is a beautiful place, and I caught some fish in it and floated around on it for a while. That was a good thing. We're our county governments are stronger than they understand that they are, just like our constitutional sheriffs are stronger than they understand they are.
Right.
We need to promote those things too. And maybe another silver bullet would to bring out Terry Branstad as the China connection to this and what they're doing. And then, and Governor Reynolds, she's got to crack. She stands there right now with a grip on this thing.
Well,
and
I know
we have a group of legislators that are now preparing. They were actually yesterday going to do a press conference that announced that the summit is dead in the water, and we need to just pull the plug. But that was pulled because the debate went on too long yesterday. Now it's scheduled for next week. But part of it is they don't want to challenge their own leadership. So they're doing this press conference that doesn't push on leadership. It just says the application is dead because South Dakota is no longer a viable alternative. It's better than nothing, but it's weaker than I would be.
Absolutely. Yeah. What a great interview. What a wonderful guy too. I mean, just stellar.
So, from our perspective, I guess, you always think, well, what can I do? Because it does seem like such a monumental task to address this. Oh, Steve just texted me. His power went out.
Oh, no. Oh, it's the blizzard.
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
the blizzard.
The blizzard.
Yeah.
For us, it's just to get the word out and share this and,
Yep.
educate more Iowans and get them motivated. Especially, I agree with you, Kevin, on the, on the idea of getting involved in primaries and
that's the most important. Yeah, that's the most important thing. Everything changes with more voter participation and engagement.
Well, that way you can put forth good conservative candidates, not just people they're going to show the party
Exactly
lines.
Right. Exactly right.
And put people in there that are really going to represent the issues from their county, their district, their state.
Yep.
So that's a big task, but that's what we.
Yep. I need to go, guys. But it's I'll let you wrap up. It was this is a really good one.
Sounds good.
And I really appreciate the
it was.
Yep.
We appreciate both of you.
Thanks. Thank you, Kevin. Thanks,
All
Garth.
right.
It's a good time today. And
have a good one. Kris, I'll stay on with you for just a second.
Okay.
All right.
Just remember, everybody, like, share, help us put the word out, please.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Indeed. Thanks. This is really, really the important aspect of this podcast and what we're trying to do. And that is to bring together local communities, ordinary Americans in those communities, so we can all learn and live liberty from the kitchen table to the county line. And what I see today is an opportunity to help increase voter turnout during primaries. And that if on local levels, we can begin to get together more frequently and outside of the GOP establishment, in terms of thinking that if I'm a part of the GOP county, I forget what they even call that. What have we been doing for a little while? Anyways, what is it called, Kris? You're muted again.
I got people in the background. You mean the county party? The Republican Party?
Yeah.
County?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I guess the Republican Party of county. But to do something outside of the Republican Party and to engage voters more. And, this was good advice, and I think it's proving to be true. And we need to be able to do that. And I think, some of the initiatives that we hope to be able to introduce through this podcast, for instance, putting together the kitchen tables where people can come together and break bread with one another and fellowship and use their free speech. And I think it's going to be activities like this that could percolate and help build more awareness and get the vote out better in the future. So if we don't, we're just going to get more of the same. So.
Well, and I don't know that it's the case in every county across our state, but I know at least in our corner of the state, most of the people that are on our county party are good little Republicans. They do what the people sitting at the head table tell them to do. And they have absolutely, no understanding of how county politics are supposed to work. Therefore, they have no understanding of how state politics and then national politics work, because at the grassroots level, there's just a lack of understanding. And so we find ourselves, we have to do an end run around even our county Republican Party, because it's captured. It's captured by Des Moines and run by whatever Des Moines, says they want, which is captured by big business and, pipeline interests and all that. So yeah, it's frustrating because yeah.
Well, we're grateful that everyone has been here listening to the show today, hearing from Steve King, who's just such a wealth of knowledge. I mean, just unbelievable. And I just want to thank him again. And we look forward to having him again in the not too distant future. So please, again, as Kris has said before, do subscribe, share, put a review out on Apple Podcasts or wherever you might listen to on Android. We would appreciate it. But yeah, I'm just so grateful. So the County Line podcast.
Like and share.
Mm-hmm.
Donate.
Yep.
You can go to freespeechamerica.org. Putting on a podcast is not cheap. And if you like what we're saying and you think it's important to continue hearing people say what we're saying and bringing on the guests we bring on, $5 a month,
Indeed.
$10, well, anything would be helpful. So we'd love your support.
Where we are learning and living liberty from the kitchen table to the county line. So thank you, everybody. God bless, and see you next week.
Have a great week. Bye, guys.
Thanks, Kris.
If you are new to the podcast, be sure to subscribe on your favorite platform and join us next week for the next installment of the County Line Podcast.